I think we're going to get started, if that's okay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Santinello. I'm the Executive Director here at Lakes Region Community Services. I want to thank everybody for coming on this night. And we have a wonderful, distinguished panel of experts here that really want to share with you information about planning and how to protect your family member with a disability. One of the things we see a lot of, and it is very sad, is if for some reason families don't set up the right will or estate plan, it really impacts their child with a disability, and it impacts their services, and all the good things people were hoping to do doesn't end up happening. So it's really important to plan. And then also, Pete's going to talk a little bit, and I think, and maybe Stu, are ways too that as an organization, as we're growing and changing, there's lots of ways that people can help an organization like Lakes Region Community Services, so they're going to give you some tips about that. So on our panel, we have Stu Wallace from Plymouth.
Just try to add some fun.
You are a teach bean, Corey, so. We have John Kitchen, who's an attorney. We have Donna Murray from Bank of New Hampshire, and Pete Woodward, former headmaster at Holderness School. And all of them are on our development committee, so they're really committed to helping Lakes Regions get to a different level. So thank you. So Stu, you're on, and I'm back here.
I have 10 minutes, and then they get the shepherd's crook and they pull me off the stage. I don't know whether I'm here primarily as, let's see, I'm the board president, so that's one function. I'm here also as one who actually just went through the entire estate planning process, which means you sign 1 million papers and get writer's cramp by the time you're finished, but everything from, we have a special needs trust, we have wills, we have powers of attorney and what have you. So we went through the plan part of all this. I've also had extensive experience working for different kinds of non-profit organizations, either as a trustee or a CEO. And so I've been on the receiving end, or hopefully on the receiving end of a number of gifts. My job is to say a few things. Number one, to define plan giving. I would put the emphasis on the plan part. Yeah. You may not see the giving part because it tends to be a time-deferred thing in most cases, but not every case. Plan giving, unlike the annual appeal, and you've probably gotten lots of annual appeal letters from various organizations right around now. But no, this is a big gift. The major gift, often, in fact, in some cases, it is the sum or part of the sum of your life's work. So it is one you think about and one you truly treasure in some way, shape, or form. It's a major gift. It is a part of your financial and estate plan. Of course, that begs the question, do you have any kind of financial or estate plan? If you don't, then you have a serious problem. You have to define what that is. It's a plan gift. It provides benefits to both the donor and the charity, which means you have to define, A, what's the benefit for you, but you also have to sit down eventually, once you figure that out, with the charity, what's the benefit for them. It may be simple, it may not be. And it may be a charity that benefits somebody you know, in which case you're talking about a gift that keeps on giving, but it may benefit somebody down the line. So it's problematic. In addition, if the charity provides a service, say, to a family member or a loved one, you're talking about a secondary benefit to the actual gift if it goes to the organization. So you're talking about a gift that can keep on giving, that can play around in different ways. And you may never see it happen. That's the time-deferred part of much of planned giving. Gifts come in a lot of forms. Probably the most common, and others will talk about this in detail, would be something like the simple bequest. I'll remember you with my will. Well, maybe not. That's the easy one. That's the one that is easiest to deal with. Of course, that's one that's out of your hands and in somebody else's hands, so you better think about who's going to be handling the will, or where it is, and maybe find it. But that's another issue. And it's not necessarily in the form of a bequest. You could have, for instance, something like retirement benefits, and you kick in after you're dead. It's another form of gift, but you're not around to see it, so hopefully it goes well. There are forms of gift which we'll talk about, the panel will talk about today, that can be given during your lifetime, and you can actually see the gift being given. You can even receive benefits from your own gift, and so, which sounds great. Your own gift will get benefits, and you can. There are ways of getting some kind of a guaranteed income from your own gift by, well, it would be crude to say using the charity as your banker, but there are ways that you can do that as well. So there's a host of things that you can do. There are advantages, obviously, to the donor, and that part, of course, comes, like now I'm putting on my board of trustee hat here. Yes, there are advantages to the donor, and it comes in a lot of ways. A planned gift, first of all, begins with the financial and personal needs of the donor. You have to figure out what that is. That's up to you, with somebody's help. Hopefully not your brother-in-law who thinks he's got all the answers. Get somebody a little better at what's going on. There may be tax advantages. My father spent his entire life working on this, and he happily retired before Ronald Reagan and before the deductible went from $60,000 a year to, what, $5.35 million a year. I'd like to say everybody can avoid the estate tax now, but I just read the paper the other day that somebody didn't wound up paying $100 million in estate tax. And of all things, he was a right-wing anti-government guy. I wonder if he meant $100 million from the government. No, there are people who, yes, still pay the estate tax, often referred to as the death tax, and a few other things. People who don't like it. There are other tax benefits, particularly capital gains. As a receiver of gifts, I've seen people do well by avoiding the capital gains tax. We had a guy once at the New Hampshire Historical Society who gave us several hundred shares of stock in a big company that he had been acquiring for about the last 65 years. I have no idea what his capital gains were, except that I'm assuming that probably 98.99% of the $40,000 we got was gained. He's just had acquired over the years. I don't know how that played out with his taxes, but there are tax benefits, and capital gains is one. A planned giving gift can mean a source of income for life or for a particular duration. That's up to you. You design that. And a planned gift can give you both peace of mind, in the sense that you have put your money where your mouth is. You've actually made a gift to an organization that provides benefits to loved ones or for a particular cause that you like. And so it is a kind of legacy gift. It is also the kind of gift that people are willing to give to organizations they believe in. This may be your life savings they're giving up. So they're going to give to an organization they truly believe in. They'll also give to an organization. I had a banker consulting me once on planned giving. He's a very good guy. He said, look, people give planned giving gifts to an organization they think is going to be around for a long time. I love that because I was director of the New Hampshire Historical Society, and I used to remind people who've been around since 1823. They're not fly-by-night, they'll be around for a long time. But it's true. They will look at the organization, not just what they do, but they want to have confidence that the organization is not just fulfilling a need, but they're going to be there for a long time, providing the kinds of benefits that you think they will. There are obvious advantages to organizations, particularly organizations like LRCS. We do receive gifts. Some of you will be getting your annual giving appeals along with everybody else's. Yes, we do accept gifts of all sorts with limitations. We'll probably get to at the very end when we talk about our gift policy. We don't take everything. Planned gifts basically help us accomplish our mission in the long term. We're here for the long term. The needs are here for the long term. They're not going to go away. Elder care, developmental disabilities, acquired brain disorders, all that stuff, that's not going to vanish. And so the need is going to be there. And we anticipate that we as an organization will be there for the long term, regardless of how the state waves its magic wand over all the problems and tries to arrive at solutions. We're going to be here for the long term, providing these needs. And this will help in the long term. Income derived from investments also are an important part of any nonprofit's in revenue package. As a head of many nonprofits, I used to look at our revenues, and we have a little pie chart too. All seen those at the annual report. Here's our pie chart, and you look at the pie chart and you say, okay, where in the world are we getting our money? Nonprofits get their money from a host of things. You can get your money from government appropriations. I worked for a museum once run by a county in Maryland. We got an appropriation every day. We didn't have to do a thing except go in front of the politicians and say nice things to them and tell them we'd invite them out for a tour of the site. Government appropriations are one thing. Foundations and government grants are another. Earned income is another source, whether it's from sales, services, rent, program fees. These are things that you look for. You have contractual arrangements. LRCS certainly has contractual arrangements. Memberships, annual giving campaigns. You tend not to make a whole lot of money with memberships, but if you can tie that in with annual giving, sometimes that helps out. Tuition, if you go to school, tuition's a big part. I teach at NHTI. 70% of our revenue picture comes from those wonderful students who I try hard to pass. So tuition is a big deal. Or income, and here's the key, income derived from investments. Income derived from investments is the part that gets the trustees and that gets the CEO to smile. Because that's the part that, even with ups and downs of the stock market, and it has its ups and downs, seems to keep on giving. It's something you hope you can get. You hope that a percent of that is unrestricted, not too many strings attached. There are a few nonprofits out there who have so much money in investments they don't have to worry about the rest. You can probably count those in New Hampshire with the fingers of one hand. Virtually everybody, even with the good science endowment. I was at a talk last night from somebody from the New Hampshire Institute of Art. Well, they were lucky. Some literally blood money from the Blood family landed $20-some million in their laps. And the courier from another member of the family got $42 million. That's rare. Most nonprofits aren't looking at those kinds of planned gifts. Most are looking at something far more smaller, more modest, maybe the sale of a home winds up being the planned gift or what have you. But it's nice if you can have those. If you have some kind of investment, whether it's through an endowment or a subsidiary or a foundation, it's something you can rely on, you can grow, and you can hope it'll help you out. I worked for a while for a museum that used to get grants for specific projects. And it was wonderful every time we got the grant, until we realized that we still needed something that we had to pay the light bill, we had to pay the janitors, we had to have the snow removed, all that stuff that of course was not in the grant proposal. And that's where you need that investment, that sort of unrestricted pool of money that helps you with all those other costs that every agency needs. So all of these things are important. Investment tends to come from planned giving. Not entirely. I worked for one organization that made an embarrassingly large profit one year. And they took their large profit and just dumped it into the endowment. That also is rare. Most nonprofits turn out to be almost no profits. Doesn't mean you can't make a profit. We just have to pump it back into the organization. And so most investments derive, at least originally, from some kind of a planned gift. It's important. In the case of Lakes Region Community Services, 83% of our revenue comes through Medicaid. That's both federal and state monies through a contract. And as you might suspect, contract with the state of New Hampshire is loaded with red tape. I don't know how many people we hire to snip red tape just to get that money in here. And that's problematic, and that's a difficulty of dealing with government money. And money that comes to us on a contractual basis. And you don't like to have that large a percentage coming from one source. That percentage is actually going down. I'm happy to say that we're beginning to rely less and less, a little bit less on just Medicaid. Who knows where that's going to go? You can read about that in the newspaper almost every day. But we're looking for other means of providing, basically, performing our mission. And the mission's changing. Where was this state going with elder care? Where are they going with PD? Where are they going with fire brigades? Where are they, almost any day you pick up the paper, you see dilemmas that the state is facing. The other thing that investments will give you, particularly the unrestricted ones, it gives you some flexibility. If you get money through a contract, if you get money through a grant, you have exactly very strict guidelines. This is what you must do. Whereas if you have some money in unrestricted investments, it provides you a little bit of flexibility. And sometimes in this kind of work, when suddenly a need arises, somebody falls off the bus, you need to come up with some money in a hurry. You need to come up with some kind of a fulfillment to perform the mission. And so these are things that we look for. That is my 10 minutes. And I'm now turning it over to John Kitchen, who's going to get into real detail. This is the nitty-gritty part of it.
They're all nitty-gritty.
Somebody has a cell phone.
Well, good evening, and I want to start off just by applauding the Lakes Region Community Services for all the work that you do, and also for doing this fundraising effort to have funds from people contributing from the community, which gives the organization more strength. And what I've been asked to talk about is special needs trust. And I know when someone has a family member or friend who has a disability and is receiving Medicaid or SSI, that how do you leave an inheritance for that family member or friend? Also, when people have a disability and a check comes in the mail, let's say it's from the Social Security Administration, where they say, well, we underpaid each month by X amount for so many years, so here's $10,000, you know. I know it sounds like winning the lottery, but we know that this happens. So that check is now, it's like a hot potato. You know, what do I do with it? Do I go to, you know, a store and just like, you know, put everything in the grocery cart and, you know, to spend it down before the end of the month? Or is there another way to preserve that money so that it can be used for worthwhile purposes over the years ahead, to go above and beyond what the public benefits do, you know? So, or it could be, and hopefully this would never happen, but if someone with disabilities is a passenger in a car and there's an auto accident, a drunk driver comes across the yellow line there, and then the person with disabilities receives a settlement from that accident. So again, you've got a hot potato check. You know, what do I do with it? And so special needs trusts can work to shelter those checks, and also to receive an inheritance. And, you know, all of us are gonna, you know, live forever, but when we get to this point where there might be like a gray hair somewhere, or even because we know people that we care about have passed on, and we think about, you know, as a parent, what do we do if we pass on? What is gonna happen with our child with disabilities? And we know that if they're receiving services here, that the area agency is going to be there, but there is, the public benefits don't provide for everything. So you want to be thinking, it's like looking over the horizon, because it's a different stage in your child's life after you're no longer there. So it's hard to look over the horizon, but if you talk to other people, other families where they are at that stage, or maybe a sibling is doing things that the parent was doing, and talk with them to try to visualize it. But what the Special Needs Trust can do is provide a plan and a sum of money, be able to do some of the things that you have done, you know, and if you think as a parent, in addition to the public benefits, you may drive your family member different places. You do a lot of things, and some of them are out of pocket things where you are using a credit card or a check or however you do it. And we don't tend to keep records of all of these things that we do. But if you did for a month, you know, just write down each thing you did, it's surprising what it amounts to. So these are things that are above and beyond what the public benefits do. So a special needs trust can help with that. And so what is a special needs trust? It's a kind of trust that is specifically mentioned in the federal and New Hampshire law on Social Security and Medicaid benefits. So there's no question that a person with disabilities can have a special needs trust and still receive those programs. It's just that the trust has to be written in a certain way. And it can make certain purchases, but not other purchases. Okay? And so the basic concept of the special needs trust is that it can go beyond what the public benefits do, but not duplicate what the public benefits do. Okay, and when you think about it, if you're leaving an inheritance for a child with disabilities, you don't want to be duplicating the public benefits. That's going to run down the balance in the trust. You want it to be available to pick up where the public benefits end, as far as things that would be of help. So the trusts have to be written in a certain way. The public benefits officials actually have decision trees that they look through to see, does this trust have these provisions in it, and it doesn't have these others. And then the trustee needs to make purchases that supplement but do not replace the public benefits. So they need to acquaint themselves with the public benefits programs. And the rules around this for special needs trusts are the same rules that apply for what a family member could purchase for a person with disabilities. So you know that if you got out your checkbook and wrote a check for $10,000 and said, here it is, to your family member with disabilities, now they're over-resourced, right? So it's the same rules that apply to what you would do. Those same rules apply to the trust. Okay, so let's see, I've still got plenty of time. I'm going to show you in my section of the materials, which is the second tab, some articles that may be helpful to you. Hopefully they're written in English. And the first one is talking about the different types of special needs trusts. And you know, I've talked about they can be used for an inheritance. So if you're making a will, you put in a provision saying X percentage or X amount goes to, then you name the trust. Okay, so and so it can be used for inheritances and also for a hot potato check. You know, so and that's what this article is talking about. It's also talking about what is the public policy behind the special needs trust. Why did Congress and our state legislature pass laws that recognize the trust? And it talks about what are the public policy implications. So if you're trying to figure out why do they allow the trust, that can explain that. And then there's an article that is talking about what can a special needs trust purchase. And you remember I mentioned a minute ago that it can be used to for the same purposes as what a family member or friend could purchase for someone with disabilities. But and we're not supposed to duplicate the public benefits, but we can go beyond the public benefits. Okay. So what does that mean in practical terms? And so this article goes through that. This is an article that I wrote for the a presentation for the ARC of the United States, which is a National Disabilities Organization. And after I wrote it, I was talking to a lawyer who works for them, and I said, you know, well, when I'm presenting this at your conference, I don't want to lead people down a wrong path. I said, is there any chance you can get someone at the national office at Social Security to look it over? And the Social Security Administration sets the basic rules for special needs trusts. And so that's why I asked, but I didn't think anything would happen. But she actually got 5 people at the national staff to look it over. And they did have a few suggestions, which I incorporated here. It doesn't mean they've endorsed it, but they haven't said that it's inaccurate. And then the state of New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services has asked me if they can use this article for training. And again, it doesn't mean they've endorsed it, but they have not said it's inaccurate. So it's set up in a frequently asked questions format, so hopefully it's easier to follow. But if we take a look at paragraph number 2, which is a few pages in, the basic concept is the special needs trust is not supposed to be used to pay for food or shelter. That also the trust can make purchases that aren't food and shelter if the check or the electronic equivalent goes to the store. So the trustee is not giving money directly to the person with disabilities. The check is going to the store. So if your family member needed a new bed, they can go to the furniture store, help pick out the bed. The trustee pays the furniture store, and the bed goes home with the person with disabilities, okay? So we're not supposed to pay for food or shelter, but, and we're supposed to write the check to the store. So food is a pretty straightforward concept, but on that paragraph 2, it gives you the definition of that, and it defines it by examples, okay? So then on the next page, there's a definition of shelter. And shelter is kind of a term of art. It definitely means rent. You know, the trusts are not supposed to pay for rent for people with disabilities because there are public benefits available for that. The Section 8 housing program, also Medicaid can provide housing assistance as well. So we're not duplicating the rent, but the trust can own a home for a person with disabilities because the public benefits don't buy people homes. Do you see the distinction there? So the trust can pay for recreation, for education, for household goods, for furniture. It can pay for transportation. It can pay for the things that the public benefits do not pay for, okay? So then it goes in this article to discuss the different types of purchases, and at the end of the article, there's an index by type of purchase. So if you were thinking about like purchase of a motor vehicle or clothing, you know, is that okay? And then it tells you where in the article that's discussed. And then after that, the next article is talking about recent rulings from the Social Security Administration. And there have been some rulings recently that people need to know about. And like I said, this has to do with what a special needs trust can purchase. It also has to do with what a parent can do for their child with disabilities. It's the same rules. And so recently there was a ruling where the Social Security Administration said that if a parent or a trust advances the money for the purchase, okay, and then is reimbursed, that's not allowed. Okay, the check could go to the store, but if somebody's getting reimbursed for having paid for the item at the store, then they could not be reimbursed, okay? And so when this ruling was made public, there was a big hue and cry about it because it's not practical, right? You know, if somebody is advancing funds to buy the bed, they should be able to get reimbursed, okay? So the Social Security Administration heard this response, and they did change the rule. They did away with it, okay? Which actually was, I think, you know, they wanted to do the right thing, but they just didn't see clearly how things need to be practical for people. I mean, we're busy enough as it is without having hoops to jump through that don't really, you know, make sense. So, yeah.
I'm just curious, and related to that, is there a way to attach a credit card to a trust? Because a lot of things people buy now,
Right.
you buy them on the internet, or a store won't take a check, or
Yeah.
how,
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people now who don't even use checks. I mean, they do it electronically, you know. So can a special needs trust have a trust credit card or debit card? Yes, they can. Yeah, so, and they weren't saying that. They were focused more on they were worried about was the family member getting money that, you know, maybe it's supposed to be for the person with disabilities. But if they're getting reimbursed for a check they already provided, you know, what's the problem here? And so, anyway, so they fixed that, and they're looking at an issue about if someone, let's say the parents have died, someone, a sibling lives in Nebraska, and they come to visit in New Hampshire. Okay, can they get paid for that trip out of the Special Needs Trust, which is supposed to be for the person with disabilities? And the Social Security Administration said no, they can't, because it's for them. And they're thinking, okay, somebody's going to go on vacation to New Hampshire, stop by for 5 minutes and say hi, and that's it. So, so that's where their thinking was, which is fine. But sometimes it's important to have a family member come to check up on things. And like, we don't have that issue here so much as, but you know, there are states out there where there's nothing like.
There's MCOs.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, I remember talking to someone who moved, for, you know, this job-related move to, and I won't name the state, you know, but wasn't in New England, I'll put it that way. And so they got to the new state and they wanted to know, you know, where's the area agency? Where's Lakes Region Community Services? And people were saying, huh? You mean that? I don't know. So finally, they got to the state official in the capital on the phone, and they explained what the area agency in New Hampshire was doing and had been doing, and the official said, no, we don't do that. You know, like that. So there are places where you need family members to check up on things. And so, so the Social Security Administration is thinking about that right now. They're trying, they want to do the right thing, but they want to balance that rule, okay? So, how am I doing that? So that will, okay, all right. So, I did have some other articles here about doing powers of attorney for your child with disabilities or guardianship, if that's important. Also, I talked about if you're leaving an inheritance through a special needs trust for a family member with disabilities, then you need to do a will that says that happens. Or you can use a revocable trust as a will substitute. And so the articles in here talk about that. So basically what I'm saying is with a special needs trust, you can leave an inheritance for a family member with disabilities. And you can also have a mechanism so that if a check comes in the mail that would disqualify the person, where can you put that? And that's really what a special needs trust is designed to do. And it's not supposed to duplicate what the public benefits do. It's supposed to go above and beyond what the public benefits do. Okay, yes?
I just have a quick, so say I don't have a lot of money right now, and I wanted to just get something, could I set up is there a minimum amount to set one up just to have it ready?
That's a really good question. I mean, most of the time, when, let's say, a parent is setting up a special needs trust, they set it up and they set up the will that leaves the
Yeah.
inheritance into it, but they don't put anything into the special needs trust until their death. Because
Okay.
you can do the same things that the special needs trust can do without the formality of the trust. So that's what most people do. Some
Okay,
some
thank
people
you.
want to put money in, and you can if you wish to. Yeah.
And so as a follow-up, because what
Yeah.
happens if you don't do the will at all, then your son or daughter, what happens to them? They would get money,
Right.
and then they probably can't set up the trust at that point?
Well, it's harder to set it up after the parent has died.
Yeah.
Because it can, if it's set up after the parent has died, then it can be set up, it says in the statute, by a parent, by a grandparent, okay, that if the parents have died, the grandparents would probably have two because they're a higher generation, then the only other alternative is to go to court to establish a special needs trust. And then if it's set up that after the parent's death, it also has to have a provision in it saying that if there's anything remaining at the death of the beneficiary with disabilities, that then the state can make a claim for the balance. Okay, which isn't true if you set it up in advance and have the will or the local trust, putting that money directly into the special needs trust after the parent has died.
That's very helpful, because I think in supporting a lot of families, I mean, a lot of us don't have a lot of money on hand, but we may
Right.
know in the future, if A and B happen, then there might be an inheritance coming, but I think a lot of people think that's only something to do if you have money. So that was very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have it in place. Yes, ma'am?
I was thinking we set up a trust for our child before we pass away. Is there a tax benefit to that? Whereas if, say like, if we didn't, it happened after, then the money that we have to be, so that for the death tax, whereas if we set up a trust now to avoid having taxes taken away.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you transfer assets into the trust while you're living, does it save on estate taxes? Okay, so first, the estate tax exemption is currently $5 million. So if you're comfortably below that, you don't have to worry about it.
You could be close, yeah.
But putting money directly into a special needs trust doesn't remove it from your estate tax column. You have to go through another procedure, which is a gift trust. Okay, but it can be done if there is a taxable or potentially taxable estate, but it needs another step in addition to, just writing the check into the special needs trust. It has to go through an intermediary step, which can be done, but you don't have to worry about it if you're below the exemption. Yeah.
On the special needs trust, who is typically the trustee and how is that funded?
That's the most important issue with the trust. I think the majority of the time, it's a sibling, and, but there are alternatives to that. You could go with a bank. You know, for example, Bank of New Hampshire has a trust department, and they do administer special needs trusts. There is also a nonprofit organization called Enhanced Life Options, which serves as trustee in cooperation with the bank to be managing the trust. So you do have options. You want to think about how the person, your preliminary choice, think about how they've acted when there has been a death in the family or some issue with your child with disabilities. You definitely want to ask the person, because sometimes people say no. But think of it this way: if the first time you found out you were trustee for your brother's child at his death was after he died, you know, that it doesn't get things off on in a good way. But there are options. You want someone who is able to handle their own finances. You know, well, we do this all electronically now. We used to say, if someone doesn't balance their own checkbook, are they going to balance your child's, you know, with disabilities? So you want to be thinking about that. And, but most of the time, siblings do step up to the plate and do, you know, do a good job. But they might need some assistance in doing it. You know, for example, to learn what they can purchase and what they can't purchase with the trust. So, I don't know if does that answer your question?
Well, the funding piece was the second part of it. How does, you know, assuming it's not a sibling,
Right.
how is the funding built into the trust, from the trustee? Assuming they're gonna get paid somehow for the time.
Right, yeah, the trust can pay for the professional assistance. You, unlike revocable trusts, you don't, after you sign them, you don't have to put everything in there, if that's what you meant by funding.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about how, in a situation where there wasn't any siblings and it ended up being, say, a bank or an agency or something.
Right,
They would charge a fee,
yes, they would,
and that would come out of the trust as well.
right, they would, yeah.
You mentioned, John, parents or grandparents can set up a special needs trust. Can siblings set one up for a sibling, or does it have to be a parent?
Yeah, I mean, the parent or grandparent can set it up without having to go to court.
Okay.
If they didn't and then they passed on, then it would need to be done through court. So it's a good idea to do it ahead of time while the parent or grandparent is living, and then, you know, it meets that requirement. Yeah.
So John, what happens with a special needs trust after the beneficiary passes on?
Okay, if it's set up ahead of time, then you designate other beneficiaries who would then receive the balance, you know. And it doesn't mean there has to be a balance for those next beneficiaries in line. It could all be used for the child with disabilities, but if there is a balance, you want to have a provision in there saying who it will go to. So it could go to other family members or whoever you wish.
Or
Or
it could be
to-
charitable
It
bequest?
could come to Lakes Region Community Services, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and some people would want to do that at the parent's death, to have a certain percentage go each way, you know, because both the Special Needs Trust and Lakes Region Community Services are that they're going to be there for So, yeah, so it can work into a charitable giving arrangement. Yeah. Okay, I think
Are there more questions? There's time at the end, I think, too,
Yeah.
for some questions, but if anybody has any, yeah.
all right.
Okay. John, thank you for the materials. I'm going to make copies and give them to the trustees of my son's special needs trust. Really good stuff in there. And Chris, you can call the other people experts, but I don't want to be an expert. X is a has-been, and a spurt is a drip of water. So I'll just continue to be Pete Woodward, former head of an independent school for 24 years. When I started in 1977, the major part of my job was educational and character building and running a plant and that sort of thing, and a very small part having to do with fundraising. By the time I quit 24 years later, about half, maybe less, of your time is spent fundraising. This is true for college presidents and independent school heads. Because 80% of your budget is tuition, 10% is annual giving, and 10% is endowment income, and then you have to build your building. So a lot of time is spent there doing that. Consequently, when I joined nonprofit boards, and have been on many and on several now, like Lakes Region, I tend to get put on the fundraising committee, which is fine. I enjoy it. But I am the father of a 43-year-old son with multiple disabilities, or differently able, as they're calling it over at school, and he's got some wonderful abilities. And thanks to Lori Vachon at Lakes Region Community Services, I am totally grateful for the opportunities that this organization provides for him and the life it gives him. So, talk briefly about planned giving, specifically about bequests, which are gifts at our death. But I would like to emphasize something that Stu said. I see planned giving as a tripod or a three-pronged fork or a trinity, whatever you want to call it. It has to do with taking care of our loved ones, and at the same time, it has to do with helping an organization or organizations or institutions that we believe in that are nonprofit. And three is taking advantage of the opportunities the tax law gives us. The tax law for disabilities is a friend. We think of tax as the enemy. It's not with our disabled children anymore, as we just heard about special needs trusts that have been made possible. So I would like to emphasize that. Several things I believe that the advantages are not just for wealthy, they're advantages for anybody. And like I believe for any organization, every gift is important, not just the big ones. So likewise, there's things we can do for our children or our charities that are important, even though it may not be a great deal of money. I'll give you some examples later on in my next appearance of some people with modest means who made a big difference in what they did. Every situation is individual and is different. What one person does not necessarily fit you. I have been to planned giving seminars where the detail is just abundant, and you get lost with detail, and you really need to just hear the broader things that are being said and think of those, and then eventually apply them to your own individual situation. Advice is often available from institutions and nonprofit organizations with development directors, such as we have and most people have, that are pretty well versed. If it gets legal and technical, you do have to seek a lawyer, and seek one who's done the work in this area, somebody like John, because you'll get your answer more accurate and you'll get it quicker, which is usually less expensive. But I would talk first about bequests. These are gifts that we leave at our death, and you can make them through your will or your trust or your codicil. I'm not the lawyer. I went to law school, but I'm not the lawyer. but I can offer my opinion that I think the trust is the best avenue. The will doesn't avoid probate, such as a trust may, and a codicil can sometimes get lost and not be as authentic as in my experience, as a trust. So I would encourage the trust that was referred to, which is a revocable trust, that you can amend while you're still living, because circumstances change, your affection for organizations change, and there's other things that can go. The fundraising and planned giving, vast majority, I saw the figure 80% of gifts that come to nonprofit organizations and educational institutions is through a bequest. They're simple. They come at the end when we don't think we need the money. And I was on the board at Perkins School for many years. My son graduated from Perkins School in Watertown, Mass. And they have an incredible endowment, something like $180 million. Almost all of it came through bequests, and mostly from people they didn't even know, but people who wanted to leave their inheritance where they wanted to make a difference and be important. And Perkins tend to grab their heartstrings, so they received time after time these incredible bequests. It does not have to be just money or cash. You can bequeath your art collection, your baseball cards, your stamp collection. You cannot bequeath your mother-in-law. You can bequeath all these other things. And then the institution receives them, and what they do is they sell them. And they don't have to deal with if there's any tax issues in terms of increased value, or which there might be, particularly in real estate, that the family may have to pay. You can avoid that. There are tax advantages. As John was saying, it used to be when the limit, estate limit was $1 million. That is not as high as it may sound for a lot of people. You put your house in there, and you put your savings in there, and 401ks, and pretty soon you're over $1 million. So you have to worry about that level, but now it's a little over $5 million, so it's not as pressing. You also see a decline because of that. You see a decline in gifts that people are making to avoid the estate tax. When you make the bequest, it can be a general amount. You can say, I bequeath $50,000 to Lakes Region Community Services. It can be, I bequeath 10% of the residue of my estate after everything is paid. Or you can have both a donation of an amount, and then later on, depending upon your trust, you may make a gift at the death of one child, and it may continue on for another child, and so you make another designation of a gift at the death of the second or third child, whatever it may be. I should mention my trust is I have several beneficiaries in it, nonprofits, including Lakes Region, and I know there'll be a certain amount in there, so I have assigned a number value to those beneficiaries. And then when my daughter-in-law, assuming she goes second, dies, then a percentage, because I don't know what it'll be then, so a percentage will go to these organizations, so it's kind of a double hit. I just have the 2 children, and my son has a special needs trust, and I'll talk about that later. That's all I have right now, because my time is up. Yes?
Can I just ask a question? If you do give to a particular organization, can you have any strings attached to how you'd like the money spent? Like
Yes, you
whether it's
can.
programming or that kind of thing, like building enhancements or whatever you decide is
You
important
sure
to you?
can. That's a good question. Generally, as the head of an institution, I like the gifts that don't have strings.
Of course.
On the other hand, I know that the strings are what attract a lot of gifts.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate when people come in and talk, and we can refine that so that it's to their advantage. And for instance, I'm very interested in financial aid at the educational institutions that I support. And so mine is usually designated towards that, and sometimes a named scholarship. So yes, and I think that's important to do. I mean, I see both sides of it,
Yeah.
and they're both worthy. So yeah, good question. Okay, Donna.
All right. So I will second that motion that I am not an expert either. I actually work in the wealth management department at the bank. So what I really do on a day-to-day basis is I'm an investment professional. So I'm more involved in stocks and bonds and what's sort of happening with the Federal Reserve and the economy. However, in helping people, so when I help people manage their money, part of that process though, as we are now approaching year end, is trying to take advantage of some of the tax laws that are out there too, so that people can keep more of what they've earned or their wealth for themselves and for their heirs. And that means less to Uncle Sam. So really, I'm not an expert in tax law, nor am I an attorney or anything like that. I also didn't want, I appreciated Pete's comment too. I don't want to get too much in the weeds of what you should or should not be doing as far as, you know, an IRA or different, you know, types of doing things or anything, but I want to give you some broad ideas of what you can do to donate to charities, and this will have a benefit to you as well, and possibly also to your heirs. So the first, the most common, probably the simplest way that people can give to a charity is simply to name them as a beneficiary. There are many areas in your life that you have things in this that will be passed on when you pass on. And you have the opportunity, much like Pete was talking, that you can put percentages, you can donate 30% to a spouse, 20% to a sibling, 10% to a niece, and donate, you know, the remainder to an organization like Lakes Region Community Services. And that's really an important part. Part of my job, I think, is having people sort of understand what their wealth means. Wealth is a scary word, and my wealth is different than your wealth, which is different than what you were talking about, Laurie, somebody else's wealth. Wealth is what you have earned, and that is very important no matter what that dollar amount. So really part of, you know, what a specialist can help you do is to provide as best as possible, to maintain or retain as much of that as possible. So I don't want you to be scared. I think it's sort of, you know, people to be scared about talking to a professional, saying, well, I don't have wealth, I really shouldn't talk to somebody, or, you know, feeling these are all things that people can help you with, and, you know, and on a nonprofit basis too, sort of outside of the confines of the buildings of where we work. So many of you would have retirement accounts, and those come in the form of an IRA or a Roth IRA. You might have a business, a simplified employee pension, which is simply that form of, you might have a 401k, which your employer helps provide for, and a SEP, or that simplified employee pension, is something that you more provide for yourself as a self-employed business person. These are not part of your estate, so they do not come under the umbrella of your will. You do need to designate a beneficiary. Now, typically in an IRA or something like that, it automatically would be left to your spouse. And in fact, if you decide not to include your spouse in that, they have to sign off on those forms. So keep that in mind. We've had people, many arguments, you know, oh, I have to tell my husband that I'm not leaving me my IRA. Okay, well, maybe I changed my mind. So you do have to designate an actual beneficiary. And as I mentioned, you can name as many as you want, and you can do it, you know, most people do it in percentages because they're not sure what they're going to have at the end. So you know, you've started an IRA and you may be 40 years old, and you say, I want, you know, 20% to go to my nieces. Most people, I think, normally do it in percentages because the final dollar amount is not known. But one of the things to keep in mind is that oftentimes when you leave money to an heir, that gets taxed away. So the IRA can, can first of all, if you leave it to an heir, it can bump them up into another tax bracket. So it kind of can almost hurt them. It also can, again, be taxed up to about even 45% of your IRA, depending obviously, on your personal situation. And again, now the laws that, state laws actually likely you'll hit on some of those, but they can get taxed away. So really giving to a charitable organization, you're getting the full value of your money. That whole amount of your, if you decide to bequeath your IRA, to roll your IRA over to them, that is not going to be taxed away at all. And the charitable organization, because they don't pay taxes, will be able to take full advantage of that. And that's something, really important to keep in mind. So if you have accounts like an IRA or 401k, the earnings that you put in were not taxed at that time. And you can grow all of that money in those accounts tax deferred until you start taking it out. You start taking out money from an IRA, a Roth, there's no set time. You determine that after 59 and a half. You can start using retirement money at 59 and a half, but the government requires you to start taking money at 70 and a half. That's your RMD, required minimum distribution. And there's sort of actuarial charts that determine how long they think at 70 and a half you'll have to live and how much money you have, so how much money you have to take out every year. And that's when Uncle Sam gets his piece of the pie. So it's important to also keep that in mind, that it does eventually get taxed. And again, this can, when you start taking that money out, that can bump you up into a new tax bracket, potentially, having that come in. You can, however, donate up to $100,000 to a charity organization, and it won't count towards your income. The other thing is, normally with deductions, you have to itemize. Whereas you can count this as a standard deduction on your tax forms. That can be a huge benefit. Now this is really pertaining more to higher wealth people. But the idea is, as it go away, as far as trying to preserve, $100,000, that can be kind of, really, well, I'm not going to have that. But the whole idea is passing on that wealth to an organization such as this one and retaining as much of that dollar value. Another place you can designate is through an insurance policy. You might have personal life insurance that you pay the premiums on, or your employer might provide insurance for you. Also, many credit cards, credit unions, and organizations have policies attached to your account or memberships. And sometimes you're not even really aware of them. You kind of fill out this paperwork and you're not really sure of what it is. And I think it's important also, these are the types of accounts that can be smaller sums. And really every little bit does help every organization. So if you take even some of those, you're saying, oh, here's, for this credit card policy, or I don't know if you you get to fill out a policy before you get on the plane or something like that. Why not just put it to Lake Region Community Services or another charitable organization? It'll all add up.
For your sponsor.
But it's just important to remember that there's a lot of different places where, this money kind of is hidden that you're not really thinking about, when you go through and you think, wow, I really don't have any assets, I don't have any insurance policies. It's pretty amazing what you really do. So start thinking about that as you start putting your wealth plan together, which is sort of what we're all talking about here. So let's see. For many of the policies, you can simply name the charity as a beneficiary. You still own the policy, for instance, on a life insurance policy, and you pay the premiums, and the charity receives the proceeds upon your death. You can also name the charity to receive just the dividends from the policy and leave the actual assets of the policy to your heirs, if that's what you decide to do. You can donate existing policies, or you can create new ones. And you can, for instance, put a new policy. You can have the organization set up a policy in your name, and then you just gift the premium payments to them on an annual basis. So again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but it's just to show you that there are a lot of different ways that you can set up insurance policies as well. You can similarly do the same with annuities, and I think are you going to speak more on annuities in a little bit? Yeah. And those can be issued through a bank or a mutual fund company, and again, would make a designation on that. There are certain advantages to having beneficiary designations. They're always revocable. That means you can change them at any time. And the assets don't have to go through probate, which takes time and can be a very costly process. And they get to go to the person or organization immediately, rather than having it tied up in probate. Designations also take precedence over a will. So if there was something, as I mentioned before, they don't really come under the umbrella of a will. If you say in a will, I want so-and-so to get my IRA or whatever it is, my life insurance policy, when you can change that on the designation form, so they can always be acted on as more current. And the designation on the form is what is applied to, not what is in the will. So that's also important to keep in mind. So let's see, how am I doing for time? Well, fine, okay. You can also gift appreciated assets. So let's say you had, you were saved up and you wanted to give some money to an organization. So let's say you wanted to give $10,000. So you could write that $10,000 off as a tax deduction. However, if you had $10,000 in a stock today, and you only paid $5,000 for that stock, and then it appreciated, grown to $10,000 through the years, his Uncle Sam is going to want his tax cut. If you go ahead and you sell that $10,000 worth of stocks, he's going to want his 15% tax or whatever. So you're only going to be left with about $8,300. So you can give the organization that $8,300. And you will have paid the tax, or you could, if you want to give them $10,000, you're going to have to come up with the money from somewhere else. However, if you give the organization the $10,000 stock itself in kind, you get the write-off of the $10,000. The organization gets the full $10,000 price. No taxes have been paid. So it's really sort of a win-win-win all around. And it's really important and interesting. While I was actually looking at some of the stuff for this talk, only 26% take advantage of this appreciated asset, while generally it's about 93% of most people use a cash or check to pay. Now it makes sense because sometimes people don't have appreciated stock, but generally speaking, it's we educate even our people who are very savvy in their financial planning. Forget about really sort of, taking use of this tax advantage that's very underutilized. You can also do the opposite with depreciated assets. So if you bought a stock for $10,000 and it's now only worth $5,000, you would want to sell that stock, because then you get to take that $5,000 loss on your taxes, and you get to take the $5,000 deduction because you donated it to a charity, and the charity still gets the full $5,000. So before if you do have accounts out there where, and you have some money invested or something like that, you really should, talk to somebody about maybe what's the best way that I can give instead of just thinking of writing a check. I think that's very important. And those were just examples. There are limits on what you can deduct per year and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want you to think that you can, start taking $10,000 deductions for this, that. But it is the idea that there's a lot of great ways that you could sort of save. And I just saw an interesting thing that was sort of sad to me on NPR the other day. Apparently New Hampshire is the lowest, or the state that donates the lowest. They just did all of these surveys and everything, and it was sort of astounding because, I don't know, I just like everyone to keep that in mind as well. Any questions? Okay.
Maybe at the end. Woodward the Boomerang is back. I'm going to be brief. I'm talking about a charitable gift annuity, and then I'm going to talk about two different trusts that I think are effective. Again, I want to remind you, 3 prongs: take care of the loved ones, serve charities or institutions that we care about, and take advantage of favorable, friendly tax law. Charitable gift annuity. These used to be more popular than they are now, but there's still good reasons to do a charitable gift annuity. This is where you will give money to the institution or the charity, the nonprofit, and you will get the income for life from that gift. And it's a guaranteed income. And for some, it's higher than what they're making right now, because I think it's around 5%, I'm not sure, but it's set up by the American Council on Gift Annuities. They set what it has to be. We used to get these from people who, A, had appreciated securities and wanted to get rid of them without paying the appreciation tax. And also they wanted to have a guaranteed income, and they wanted to avoid the estate tax. They didn't want this to be in their estate. It's a nice way for an institution to market itself and to build up a number of these gift annuities. Next one I'd like to talk about is very dear to me. It's called the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, CRU or CRUT. This is where the donor gives the money, the gift, to the institution. The institution manages that money, and the institution pays the interest out to whatever the donor wants it to. In my case, I wanted it to feed my son's special needs trust, so that I wouldn't worry when I die. I'm getting closer, and I don't want to worry. I want to know that's going to be there for him. So this really works well for me. So I choose, doesn't have to be one institution, it can be several, but one will manage it. So you can be good to 2 or 3 of your favorites doing this. And the institution manages it, so you want to make sure you give it to a place that does manage their assets very well. And then it'll feed, in this case, a special needs trust. I should mention the question about who does your trust. I have 2 former students, they're both investment types, that managed my son's special needs trust. I said, you owe me. I kept you in school, but I should have gotten rid of you. I said, you owe me. And they do a great job. They're both down in New York. That's the only problem. They do a great job. Has various kinds of tax savings, capital gains, donation. There's a number of things in this law that make it advantageous. It's not why you do it, but it's a byproduct. You get some nice tax savings out of it. I will say it's not something you can do on your own. It's fairly complicated, and not all nonprofits or institutions have somebody on board that can do it. Quite often you have to get a lawyer or a very skilled development officer experience to help you. 3 examples of people who use this to the benefit of the institution. A Latin teacher for many years, most of his life, and his wife, a secretary in school, had no children, and they wanted to make sure that they made a contribution back to the school, and so they created this charitable remainder unit trust. And when they died, the money was realized by the school. I should backtrack 1 second. Your beneficiary doesn't just have to be the special needs trust. It can also be, after that, another child, or 2 children, or whatever. You can designate. It makes a little difference in your tax advantage in terms of what the expected longevity of people are, but it doesn't have to be one person. There was a couple who were getting to be elderly. They had one daughter who was well enough healed that she doesn't need, and they didn't want her to have their corpus, their wealth, but they wanted her to be able to live off the interest from it. And so they made a charitable renew unit trust. For her lifetime, the daughter's lifetime, she would get the yearly, monthly, quarterly pay, and but then when they died, income, and then when they died, it went to the school. And then finally, a couple who had a very nice house on Swan Lake. He had been a school teacher at other places, but he had a very nice place and increased in value. All the properties on Swan Lake, so one went to Saki, it just grew exponentially. And so he wanted to do something. He'd been an educator, and they wanted to do something. So they created, by gifting their home on Swan Lake to 2 different educational institutions. Although only one of them managed it and did all the work to create the vehicle. Fortunately, it was us. And when they died, well, you sell the house right away, and then you put the money in a fund that you have to manage. So those are 3 examples of people who didn't have, none of these 3, or 2 of the 3 couples did not have much money, but they were able to do something that was very meaningful to them, and also do something for an institution they cared about. There's the Charitable Lead Trust, which is sort of in reverse. You give the money to the institution, and they, during your lifetime, can realize the annual income from the investment, but then at your death, or whenever you designate, usually death, then it can go to your grandchildren, or grandchildren. Because a lot of people, they want to leave money to their kids, they don't want to ruin them, they want them to have that sense of doing it on their own, and but in the end, after they're established, it wouldn't hurt to have some little extra income. So that's called a Charitable Lead Trust. And the others are fairly sophisticated and not very common. So any questions? Thank you.
My part will last about 2 minutes. First of all, a couple of things. One is that the Lakes Region Community Service is a nonprofit. Yes, we get a lot of money from official sources. We're a nonprofit. Any nonprofit organization is going to have a mission statement. They're there for a purpose, and they're going to have a gift admissions policy of some sort. They don't want just anything that comes in through the door. I was director of the New Hampshire Historical Society for a while, and people often said, well, they just want a lot of old stuff. And the old stuff went to the dump or it got sold, and that was what we got. I was director of the Crispin Hall Planetarium, and somebody gave us a house once. And for all of 10 minutes, we thought it was a great idea, until we realized there was a mortgage, back taxes, a lot of expenses. And we didn't need, the mission statement didn't say anything about owning a house in the west end of Concord, and so we declined it. Mission statement for Lakes Region Community Services is very simple. We actually go through this once every year as a board. Lakes Region Community Services is dedicated to serving the community by promoting independence, dignity, and opportunity. It's pretty general, which is probably good, not too restrictive. But we have a gift acceptance policy, as does every organization. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at your own finances and where you are in terms of what your needs are, what are your personal interests, what do you want for you, your family, what have you. The second thing you need to think about is the recipient, the person who's going to get whatever it is you plan to give. You want to make sure that you're in sync with their mission statement. You may know it all too well, especially if it's something like LRCS and you already have somebody who's being cared for by LRCS. But then you do want to take a look at the policy itself. You'll notice after tab 6, I'm not going to go through all this, we actually have our gift acceptance policy. Most nonprofits are perfectly happy to accept money. Most are happy to accept certain stocks, certain very simple stuff that can be put right into some form of investment, and they will have different ways of investing money. It gets a little trickier when you start talking about things and property. They may or may not want that. It gets really tricky with bequests. bequest, because normally with annuities or trusts, you do some back and forth in negotiating donor versus recipient. With bequests, who knows what's suddenly gonna wind up in somebody's will and wind up coming in the door. It may just as quickly go out the back door. You never know, actually, so you have to, you're sort of stuck because you can't negotiate anymore with a dead person. That's true. So think about that, and if you're gonna put somebody in your will, do sit down and look at their acceptance policy. There are certain things they do not want. Sometimes we talked about are there strings. You name a scholarship after them, that's a great thing. You can come up with all sorts of gimmicks. You can name a chair at the school after them, what have you. That's a great thing. And people love that sort of stuff. But sometimes the strings become too restrictive. I remember once talking to the woman who was running all the charitable trust for the state. She was shaking her head because he said, we have this guy who wants to give a ton of money, and everything was going just great until we wound up with, oh, and by the way, the benefits can only go to white Christian boys in Kensington, New Hampshire. Now that's the kind of string you don't want to be throwing in there. So you as the donating, as the institution receiving, have to do some back and forth and try to get people reined in to the point they're doing something for your benefit. So do keep that in mind. The gift acceptance policy is here, it's fairly straightforward. The agency does reserve the right, it sounds like a terrible thing to say, but to actually decline your gift. More than likely what they're going to do is going to steer you in a direction that makes your gift most beneficial to the organization, which is what you're after in the end. So do keep that in mind. There's a donor bill of rights there, and Joanne has actually put together a very nice statement of the benefits of the legacy gifts, including our federal employee identification number. But these are all things you want to look at. This has been a whirlwind in what, less than an hour and a half. And we're open for questions now at this point. But,
Do you want my rainwater or not?
is it going
Going down the back of
put it in the back of my car, please. Well, we had you talk about appreciation. We had a good friend who had a place on Swan Lake, 700 feet of property on Swan Lake. She lived right next to the place where they did on Golden Pond. And she had a place in Back Bay, Boston, loaded with artwork, including John Singer Sargent, landscape paintings. And she died, had 3 children, and all of a sudden realized they had a serious problem. How do you divide that 700 feet? How do you divide a John Singer Sargent portrait? And a lot of gifts were made in a hurry because of to keep her family together. Sometimes you don't realize what you have.
Right.
She did not. She had no idea that 700 feet on Swan Lake was worth the fortune it was. It wasn't, but the stupid movie out.
Yeah.
But you don't always know what your property's worth. Any other questions? If not, then you're going to have to go read.
Thank you all for
That was
coming.
very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.